Most people treat uncertainty as an obstacle. They believe decisions should only be made once enough information is available, once the outcome feels predictable, or once doubt disappears. When uncertainty remains, they delay. Analytical thinkers understand a more accurate reality. Uncertainty is not a temporary inconvenience. It is the default condition of decision-making. Waiting for certainty is not cautious. It is unrealistic. Most important decisions are made with incomplete information, imperfect models, and unknown outcomes. The idea that certainty will arrive later is often an illusion. Uncertainty is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. The problem is not uncertainty itself. The problem is how people react to it. Uncertainty creates discomfort. Discomfort triggers avoidance. Avoidance delays decisions. Delay has consequences. Analytical thinkers do not try to eliminate uncertainty. They learn to operate inside it. Most people assume uncertainty means ignorance. They think, "I don't know enough yet. I need more information. I'm not ready to decide." Sometimes this is true. Often, it is not. More information does not always reduce uncertainty. Sometimes it increases it. Analytical thinkers recognize diminishing returns. They ask, what information would meaningfully change my decision? What information is unlikely to arrive? What uncertainty is unavoidable? This reframing prevents endless delay. Another reason uncertainty feels threatening is illusion of control loss. Certainty creates the feeling of control. Uncertainty exposes reality. Control is limited. Analytical thinkers accept limited control. They focus on decision quality, not outcome certainty. Another mistake people make is assuming uncertainty means equal risk. Not all uncertainty is dangerous. Some uncertainty carries low downside. Some carries hidden opportunity. Analytical thinkers evaluate asymmetry. They ask, what is the worst-case downside? What is the best-case upside? Are outcomes balanced or skewed? This analysis guides action. Another reason uncertainty feels intolerable is emotional amplification. The brain treats unknown outcomes as threatening. Fear fills the information gap. Analytical thinkers separate fear from probability. They do not assume unknown equals bad. Another misconception is that uncertainty means irresponsibility. People fear being judged for acting without full knowledge. Analytical thinkers understand that inaction is also a decision. Choosing not to decide has consequences. Avoiding choice does not avoid risk. It shifts it. Another reason people resist uncertainty is narrative craving. The mind wants clear stories. Uncertainty disrupts storylines. Analytical thinkers accept incomplete narratives. They work with fragments. Another factor is false precision. People wait for precise answers that cannot exist. Analytical thinkers use ranges, not exactness. They think probabilistically. Another mistake is assuming uncertainty is temporary. Many decisions remain uncertain forever. Analytical thinkers do not wait for resolution. They act with incomplete clarity. Another source of discomfort is identity pressure. People want to appear confident and decisive. Uncertainty threatens image. Analytical thinkers separate confidence from decisiveness. They act without pretending certainty. Another issue is overweighting unknown risks. People fear unknown risks more than known ones. Analytical thinkers compare risks symmetrically. Unknown does not automatically mean worse. Another mistake is treating uncertainty as a signal to stop. Analytical thinkers treat it as a signal to design safeguards. They reduce downside instead of seeking certainty. Another misunderstanding is binary thinking. People treat decisions as right or wrong. Analytical thinkers treat decisions as adaptive steps. They adjust after action. Another reason uncertainty paralyzes is lack of decision frameworks. Without structure, uncertainty overwhelms. Analytical thinkers rely on process. Process stabilizes thinking when information is incomplete. Another overlooked point is that certainty often arrives too late. By the time outcomes are clear, the decision window has closed. Analytical thinkers act while options still exist. Another critical insight is learning happens after action. Waiting prevents feedback. Analytical thinkers use action to reduce uncertainty. They learn by doing. Another factor is risk misinterpretation. People confuse uncertainty with danger. Analytical thinkers separate unpredictability from harm. Another mistake is confusing preparation with delay. Preparation becomes avoidance when it has no endpoint. Analytical thinkers set decision thresholds. Another cause of paralysis is perfection bias. People want optimal decisions. Analytical thinkers want robust ones. Robust decisions perform reasonably well across many outcomes. Another insight is uncertainty exposes values. What matters becomes clearer when outcomes are unclear. Analytical thinkers use uncertainty to clarify priorities. The core lesson of this chapter is foundational. Uncertainty is not something to solve. It is something to navigate. Those who wait for certainty fall behind. Those who learn to decide without it gain leverage. In the next chapter, we will explore why waiting for certainty leads to worse decisions, and how delay quietly increases risk instead of reducing it. Uncertainty does not mean stop. It means think differently. Chapter 2: Why waiting for certainty leads to worse decisions. Most people believe waiting improves decisions. They assume that more time leads to more information, clearer outcomes, and safer choices. When uncertainty appears, delay feels responsible. Analytical thinkers understand a quieter danger. Waiting often increases risk instead of reducing it. Certainty rarely arrives on schedule. Opportunities expire. Conditions change. Costs accumulate. By the time clarity appears, the decision has already been made, by circumstances. Waiting is not neutral. It is an action with consequences. Analytical thinkers evaluate delay as a choice, not a pause. One reason waiting leads to worse decisions is information decay. Information becomes outdated. Markets shift. People change. Constraints tighten. Waiting assumes information will improve, but often it simply becomes irrelevant. Analytical thinkers ask, what information will actually change? What information will remain uncertain? What opportunity cost does delay create? This prevents false patience. Another reason waiting fails is option erosion. Most decisions involve optionality, the ability to choose among paths. Delay reduces options. Doors close quietly. Analytical thinkers act while flexibility exists. Another danger is risk compounding. While waiting feels safe, underlying risks continue to grow. Small issues become structural problems. Analytical thinkers assess risk trajectories. They ask, is risk increasing with time? Does delay magnify downside? What risks are invisible right now? This reveals urgency without panic. Another reason waiting backfires is false reassurance. Time creates the illusion of caution. People feel responsible simply by not acting. Analytical thinkers measure responsibility by outcomes, not delay. Another danger is decision drift. Without deliberate choice, external forces decide. Deadlines pass. Others act. Circumstances harden. Analytical thinkers prefer conscious decisions over drift. Another issue is emotional rationalization. Delay feels comfortable. Comfort masquerades as prudence. Analytical thinkers question comfort. They ask, is this delay improving the decision or protecting me from discomfort? This honesty exposes avoidance. Another reason waiting fails is learning suppression. Decisions generate feedback. Delay prevents feedback. Analytical thinkers learn by acting. They do not wait to learn. Another danger is loss of momentum. Action builds clarity. Delay builds stagnation. Analytical thinkers understand that clarity often follows movement. Another issue is overconfidence in future clarity. People assume they will feel more certain later. Often, uncertainty persists. Analytical thinkers do not rely on future certainty. They rely on present structure. Another danger is shifting baselines. What once felt risky becomes normal. Delay normalizes risk. Analytical thinkers resist normalization. They reevaluate conditions regularly. Another issue is misplaced risk aversion. Avoiding immediate risk can create larger long-term risk. Analytical thinkers compare short-term discomfort with long-term cost. Another reason waiting leads to worse decisions is attention diversion. Delay invites distraction. The problem loses salience. When attention returns, urgency is higher and options fewer. Analytical thinkers maintain engagement. Another danger is external dependency. Waiting often depends on others acting first. This reduces control. Analytical thinkers prefer agency over prediction. Another issue is escalation of commitment to inaction. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to act. Inaction becomes the default. Analytical thinkers interrupt this pattern early. Another reason waiting fails is false precision pursuit. People wait for exact numbers that cannot exist. Analytical thinkers work with ranges. Another danger is time pressure inversion. Delay reduces time available for execution. Analytical thinkers separate decision time from execution time. Another issue is identity attachment to caution. People identify as careful and confuse caution with delay. Analytical thinkers redefine caution as risk-aware action. Another danger is opportunity invisibility. Some opportunities only appear through action. Waiting prevents discovery. Analytical thinkers explore to reveal opportunity. Another issue is moral licensing. People excuse poor outcomes because they waited responsibly. Analytical thinkers evaluate results honestly. Another danger is feedback distortion. Delayed action prevents calibration. Analytical thinkers adjust through repetition. Another reason waiting leads to worse decisions is cost accumulation. Costs grow quietly while waiting. Analytical thinkers include waiting costs explicitly. Another danger is false safety signals. Silence feels safe, but silence often means stagnation. Analytical thinkers treat silence as data. Another issue is misjudging reversibility. Many decisions are reversible early. Delay turns them irreversible. Analytical thinkers act while reversal is possible. Another danger is emotional entrenchment. The longer a decision is delayed, the more emotion accumulates. Analytical thinkers decide before emotion peaks. Another reason waiting fails is competition effects. Others act while you wait. Their actions shape the environment. Analytical thinkers act within competitive timelines. Another issue is analysis paralysis reinforcement. Waiting strengthens indecision habits. Analytical thinkers break this cycle deliberately. Another danger is overvaluing certainty relative to impact. Some decisions matter less than assumed. Analytical thinkers right-size importance. The core lesson of this chapter is clear. Waiting for certainty is itself a risky strategy. Good decisions are not made when doubt disappears. They are made when risk is understood. Downside is limited. Options are preserved. Learning is enabled. Analytical thinkers do not rush. but they do not stall. They move when movement improves outcomes. In the next chapter, we will explore risk, probability, and emotional distortion, and why people consistently misjudge danger under uncertainty. Certainty feels safe. Action creates safety. Chapter 3: Risk, Probability, and Emotional Distortion. Most people believe they assess risk logically. They assume that when they evaluate danger, opportunity, or downside, they are weighing probabilities objectively. Analytical thinkers understand a critical complication. Risk is rarely evaluated through probability. It is filtered through emotion first. Emotion does not merely influence risk perception. It reshapes it. Fear magnifies unlikely dangers. Hope minimizes likely ones. Anxiety distorts time horizons. Confidence suppresses caution. This distortion happens automatically. By the time reasoning begins, emotional weighting is already embedded in perception. Analytical thinkers do not attempt to remove emotion from risk assessment. They learn to correct for it. The first distortion is probability neglect. When emotion is strong, the brain ignores probability entirely. Rare but vivid risks feel larger than common but boring ones. Analytical thinkers notice emotional intensity. They ask, how likely is this outcome? How severe is it? Am I reacting to probability or vividness? This separates fear from likelihood. Another distortion is outcome fixation. People focus on how bad or good an outcome would feel, not how likely it is. Analytical thinkers distinguish severity, probability. High severity with low probability requires different handling than moderate severity with high probability. Another distortion is loss aversion amplification. Losses feel more painful than gains feel pleasurable. This causes people to overweight downside. Analytical thinkers evaluate symmetric outcomes. They ask, what is the expected value? What do I gain by acting? What do I lose by not acting? This reframing restores balance. Another emotional distortion is temporal compression. Emotion shortens time horizons. Immediate risks feel more important than long-term ones. Analytical thinkers expand time perspective. They ask, what happens over time? Which risks grow? Which risks fade? This reveals hidden danger. Another distortion is control illusion. People underestimate risks they feel in control of and overestimate risks they do not. Driving feels safer than flying, despite statistics. Analytical thinkers distrust control feelings. They rely on data, not comfort. Another common error is zero-risk bias. People prefer eliminating a small risk entirely rather than reducing a larger one significantly. Analytical thinkers prioritize risk reduction, not elimination. Another distortion is availability bias. Recent or memorable events dominate risk perception. Analytical thinkers widen reference frames. They seek base rates. Another emotional distortion is catastrophic imagination. The mind simulates worst-case scenarios vividly. Analytical thinkers examine worst-case realism. They ask, how often does this actually occur? What safeguards exist? What recovery options are available? This reduces fear-based paralysis. Another issue is optimism bias. People underestimate risks that affect themselves. Analytical thinkers assume personal vulnerability. This improves caution. Another distortion is social amplification. Group emotion magnifies perceived risk. Analytical thinkers separate signal from social noise. Another issue is binary risk framing. People frame risk as safe or unsafe. Analytical thinkers think in gradients. Risk exists on a spectrum. Another distortion is probability anchoring. Initial numbers anchor perception even when arbitrary. Analytical thinkers test anchors. Another error is confusing uncertainty with danger. Uncertainty feels unsafe. Analytical thinkers distinguish unknown from harmful. Another distortion is overconfidence after success. Past success reduces perceived risk. Analytical thinkers recalibrate continuously. Another issue is underweighting slow risks. Gradual risks feel invisible. Analytical thinkers track accumulation. Another emotional distortion is regret avoidance. People fear regret more than harm. Analytical thinkers evaluate regret realistically. Another error is misplaced precision. False exactness creates false confidence. Analytical thinkers use ranges. Another distortion is personal narrative bias. People interpret risk through self-story. Analytical thinkers step outside narrative. Another issue is probability blindness under stress. Stress collapses reasoning. Analytical thinkers reduce stress before deciding. Another error is confusing risk with responsibility. People avoid risk to avoid blame. Analytical thinkers prioritize outcomes over image. Another distortion is rare event obsession. Unlikely disasters dominate thinking. Analytical thinkers contextualize rarity. Another issue is magnitude neglect. Small probabilities feel similar regardless of scale. Analytical thinkers quantify impact. Another distortion is emotional contagion. Fear spreads socially. Analytical thinkers pause contagion. Another error is ignoring second-order effects. People focus on immediate outcomes. Analytical thinkers examine downstream consequences. Another distortion is survivorship bias. Only visible outcomes shape perception. Analytical thinkers look for invisible failures. Another issue is moral risk framing. Moral language inflates perceived danger. Analytical thinkers separate ethics from probability. Another distortion is certainty craving. People demand absolute safety. Analytical thinkers accept residual risk. Another error is overreacting to volatility. Fluctuations feel dangerous. Analytical thinkers distinguish noise from trend. The core lesson of this chapter is critical. Risk is not what feels dangerous. Risk is what actually threatens outcomes over time. Emotion exaggerates some dangers and hides others. Analytical thinkers compensate by separating probability from impact, using ranges instead of certainties, expanding time horizons, evaluating downside protection, designing recovery paths. They do not try to feel safe. They try to be resilient. In the next chapter, we will explore making reversible vs irreversible decisions and how recognizing this difference simplifies decision-making under uncertainty. Fear feels urgent. Probability is quieter and more accurate. Chapter 4: Making reversible vs irreversible decisions. Most people treat all decisions the same. They apply equal caution, equal stress, and equal hesitation regardless of the actual consequences. This creates unnecessary pressure and leads to poor timing. Analytical thinkers make a crucial distinction. Not all decisions deserve the same level of fear. The most important dividing line in decision-making under uncertainty is reversibility. A reversible decision can be adjusted, corrected, or undone at reasonable cost. An irreversible decision permanently closes options. Confusing these two categories causes paralysis. Analytical thinkers separate them early. This separation simplifies everything. Most daily decisions are reversible, yet people treat them as final. This exaggeration creates fear where none is needed. Analytical thinkers downgrade fear when reversibility exists. They act sooner. Irreversible decisions are rare. They involve permanent consequences, large commitments, or outcomes that cannot be meaningfully undone. Analytical thinkers slow down for these, but do not freeze. They prepare differently. One reason people misjudge reversibility is emotional amplification. Emotion makes decisions feel heavier than they are. Analytical thinkers override emotional weight with structural analysis. They ask, can this be reversed? At what cost? How quickly? These questions deflate false gravity. Another reason reversibility is misunderstood is social perception. People fear embarrassment, judgment, or reputation damage. These feel irreversible, but often are not. Analytical thinkers separate social discomfort from actual permanence. Embarrassment fades. Reputation recovers. Options reopen. Another cause is identity attachment. When decisions feel like identity statements, reversibility disappears psychologically. Analytical thinkers treat decisions as experiments, not definitions. Experiments can be adjusted. Another error is overestimating commitment cost. People assume once they choose, they are trapped. Analytical thinkers define exit points before acting. Exit clarity restores confidence. Another mistake is timing misalignment. People delay reversible decisions and rush irreversible ones. Analytical thinkers reverse this pattern. They move quickly on reversible choices. They slow down on irreversible ones. This protects optionality. Another reason people confuse reversibility is binary thinking. Decisions are framed as all or nothing. Analytical thinkers seek partial commitments. They reduce scope. Partial commitments preserve flexibility. Another issue is fear of inconsistency. People resist changing course because they fear looking inconsistent. Analytical thinkers value adaptability over consistency. Updating is not weakness. Another cause is false sunk cost perception. People assume any investment makes reversal impossible. Analytical thinkers distinguish sunk costs from future costs. They evaluate decisions forward, not backward. Another reason reversibility is misjudged is unclear consequence mapping. People imagine worst-case permanence without analyzing likelihood. Analytical thinkers map consequences explicitly. This reduces distortion. Another issue is time horizon blindness. Some decisions are irreversible only in the short term. Analytical thinkers extend time perspective. Another mistake is mistaking discomfort for danger. Reversible decisions can feel emotionally intense. Analytical thinkers do not confuse feeling with consequence. Another reason people freeze is perfection pressure. They believe irreversible decisions must be perfect. Analytical thinkers seek robustness, not perfection. Another issue is lack of decision segmentation. People treat compound decisions as single commitments. Analytical thinkers break decisions into stages. Each stage is more reversible than the whole. Another cause is overvaluing initial choice. People believe the first decision determines everything. Analytical thinkers know adaptation matters more than selection. Another mistake is delayed learning. Reversible decisions provide feedback. Waiting prevents learning. Analytical thinkers act to learn. Another issue is loss framing. People focus on what could be lost by acting, not by waiting. Analytical thinkers evaluate both. Another distortion is moral weight inflation. Some decisions feel morally heavy but are practically reversible. Analytical thinkers separate ethics from permanence. Another reason reversibility is misunderstood is absence of rehearsal. People have never practiced reversing decisions. Analytical thinkers rehearse exit scenarios mentally. This reduces fear. Another issue is control illusion collapse. Irreversible decisions expose lack of control. Analytical thinkers accept limited control. They focus on damage containment. Another mistake is timing anxiety. People think delaying irreversible decisions improves outcomes. Sometimes it worsens them. Analytical thinkers balance timing carefully. Another factor is overconfidence in foresight. People believe they can predict outcomes before acting. Analytical thinkers rely on correction ability instead. Another reason people avoid acting is reputation lock-in. They fear being associated with a decision forever. Analytical thinkers understand reputations evolve. Another mistake is treating reversibility as weakness. Changing course is seen as failure. Analytical thinkers see it as intelligence. The central insight of this chapter is this: decision quality improves when reversibility is recognized early. Analytical thinkers move fast on reversible decisions. Slow down on irreversible ones. Reduce scope. Define exits. Preserve options. Learn through action. They do not seek certainty. They seek recoverability. In the next chapter, we will explore how to decide with incomplete information and how analytical thinkers act responsibly even when key facts are missing. Not all decisions require confidence. Some only require the ability to adjust. Chapter 5: How to decide with incomplete information. Most decisions are made without full information. This is not an exception. It is the rule. Yet most people treat incomplete information as a reason to wait. They assume that responsible decisions require completeness, clarity, and confidence. Analytical thinkers understand a more functional truth. Incomplete information does not prevent good decisions. Poor structure does. Decisions fail not because information is missing, but because uncertainty is unmanaged. The first step in deciding with incomplete information is acceptance. Analytical thinkers do not waste energy wishing for certainty. They accept the boundary of what can be known. Acceptance reduces emotional friction. Without acceptance, the mind resists forward movement. Once acceptance is established, analytical thinkers shift focus from knowing everything to knowing what matters. Not all information has equal value. Some facts meaningfully change decisions. Most do not. Analytical thinkers ask, what information would actually change my choice? What information is unlikely to arrive? What uncertainty must I live with regardless? This filtering prevents information chasing. Another key principle is threshold decision-making. Instead of waiting for perfect clarity, analytical thinkers define thresholds. What is enough information? What level of confidence is sufficient? What downside is acceptable? Once thresholds are met, action follows. Thresholds replace hesitation. Another critical technique is separating decision from outcome. People hesitate because they fear bad outcomes. Analytical thinkers evaluate decision quality based on reasoning, not results. A good decision can still produce a bad outcome. This separation allows action under uncertainty. Another powerful method is assumption visibility. Incomplete information hides assumptions. Analytical thinkers surface them explicitly. What am I assuming is true? How confident am I in that assumption? What happens if it fails? Visible assumptions can be managed. Hidden assumptions create surprise. Another principle is asymmetric risk evaluation. Incomplete information is less dangerous when downside is limited and upside exists. Analytical thinkers look for asymmetry. They ask, what is the worst plausible downside? Can I survive it? What is the upside if this works? Asymmetry guides action. Another strategy is deciding in stages. Analytical thinkers avoid all-or-nothing decisions. They act incrementally. Each step reveals information. Each step reduces uncertainty. This staged approach converts unknowns into data. Another technique is pre-mortem analysis. Before acting, analytical thinkers imagine failure. They ask, how could this go wrong? What warning signs would appear? What could I do to reduce damage? This prepares the mind without paralyzing it. Another important method is downside protection. When information is incomplete, safety margins matter more than optimization. Analytical thinkers build buffers. Time buffers, financial buffers, emotional buffers, exit options. Buffers absorb uncertainty. Another principle is decision documentation. Writing down why a decision was made clarifies reasoning. Later review improves judgment. Analytical thinkers document what they knew, what they didn't, why they acted anyway. This builds learning loops. Another technique is probabilistic thinking. Instead of asking, "Will this work?" analytical thinkers ask, "How likely is this? What range of outcomes exists? What does success look like at different levels?" Probabilities allow movement without certainty. Another practice is context awareness. Some environments punish delay more than error. Analytical thinkers adjust behavior to context. Speed matters in dynamic systems. Precision matters in stable ones. Another strategy is option preservation. When information is incomplete, keeping options open is valuable. Analytical thinkers avoid locking themselves in too early. They design reversibility. Another important habit is emotional regulation. Incomplete information increases anxiety. Anxiety distorts decisions. Analytical thinkers calm emotion before choosing. They do not decide while overwhelmed. Another method is minimum viable commitment. Instead of full commitment, analytical thinkers choose the smallest action that moves forward. This reduces risk. Another principle is feedback prioritization. Analytical thinkers choose actions that generate information quickly. Fast feedback reduces uncertainty. Another technique is avoiding narrative certainty. People tell themselves stories to feel confident. Analytical thinkers resist storytelling. They remain factual. Another strategy is time-boxing uncertainty. Analytical thinkers limit how long uncertainty is allowed to stall action. Time limits force clarity. Another practice is risk normalization. They accept that some uncertainty remains after action. They do not seek emotional closure before acting. Another principle is learning orientation. Analytical thinkers treat decisions as learning opportunities. Mistakes are information. Another method is confidence calibration. They act without needing full confidence. They act with appropriate confidence. Another important insight is information asymmetry awareness. Others may act with less information than you think. Waiting may not confer advantage. Another strategy is removing ego from decision quality. Decisions are evaluated by reasoning, not pride. Another principle is progress bias. Analytical thinkers favor forward movement when uncertainty is irreducible. Stagnation increases risk. Another key habit is review after action. They assess outcomes without self-judgment. Learning compounds. The central insight of this chapter is this: deciding with incomplete information is not reckless. It is unavoidable. What separates good decisions from bad ones is not certainty. It is structure, safeguards, and adaptability. Analytical thinkers define thresholds, surface assumptions, limit downside, act incrementally, learn continuously. They do not wait for clarity. They build it through action. In the next chapter, we will explore thinking in scenarios instead of predictions and why flexible planning outperforms forecasting under uncertainty. Incomplete information is not a barrier. It is the environment. Chapter 6: Thinking in Scenarios Instead of Predictions. Most people approach decisions by trying to predict the future. They ask, what will happen? Which outcome is most likely? What is the correct forecast? This approach feels logical. It is also fragile. Analytical thinkers understand a critical limitation. Predictions break easily under uncertainty. Scenarios do not. Predictions require accuracy. Scenarios require preparedness. When uncertainty is high, accuracy is rare. The mistake most people make is assuming good decisions depend on correct predictions. They do not. They depend on resilience across outcomes. Scenario thinking replaces the question "what will happen" with a better one. What could happen, and how would I respond? This shift reduces anxiety and improves decision quality. Prediction thinking seeks one future. Scenario thinking prepares for many. Most environments worth worrying about are dynamic, complex, and influenced by factors outside your control. In these environments, single-path forecasts fail. Analytical thinkers stop betting on one outcome. They design decisions that survive multiple futures. The first principle of scenario thinking is range awareness. Instead of a single expected outcome, analytical thinkers define a range. Best plausible case. Worst plausible case. Most likely band in between. This creates psychological stability. Uncertainty feels manageable when boundaries exist. Another principle is response planning, not outcome guessing. Analytical thinkers ask, if the best case occurs, what should I do? If the worst case occurs, what will I do? What actions are sensible across most scenarios? This shifts effort from speculation to preparation. Another key idea is robust decision selection. A robust decision performs reasonably well across many scenarios, even if it is not optimal in any single one. Analytical thinkers prefer robustness over optimization under uncertainty. Optimization requires prediction. Robustness requires flexibility. Another benefit of scenario thinking is emotional regulation. Fear decreases when responses are planned. The unknown feels less threatening once contingency exists. Analytical thinkers calm anxiety by mapping responses. Another mistake people make is probability obsession. They debate which scenario is most likely instead of preparing for meaningful ones. Analytical thinkers care less about likelihood and more about impact. Low probability, high impact scenarios deserve attention. High probability, low impact ones require efficiency. Another key practice is trigger identification. Analytical thinkers define signals that indicate which scenario is unfolding. They ask, what early signs matter? What data would shift my response? What should I watch? Triggers convert uncertainty into action. Another important principle is avoiding narrative fixation. People fall in love with stories about the future. Stories feel coherent and comforting. Analytical thinkers resist story attachment. They remain flexible. Another advantage of scenario thinking is decision speed. When responses are preconsidered, action is faster when change occurs. Analytical thinkers are not surprised. They are ready. Another mistake people make is assuming scenario planning requires complexity. It does not. Even simple scenario mapping improves decisions dramatically. 3 scenarios are often enough. More adds noise. Another principle is time horizon layering. Analytical thinkers consider scenarios across time. Short-term shifts, medium-term trends, long-term structural changes. This prevents tunnel vision. Another benefit is learning acceleration. When outcomes occur, analytical thinkers compare reality to scenarios. They update models. Prediction thinkers are shocked. Scenario thinkers adapt. Another error scenario thinking avoids is single-point failure. Decisions dependent on one outcome are fragile. Analytical thinkers avoid dependency. They diversify approaches. Another advantage is confidence without certainty. Scenario thinking allows decisiveness without pretending to know the future. This is powerful. Another principle is stress testing assumptions. Each scenario challenges different assumptions. Analytical thinkers identify which assumptions break first. This reveals hidden risk. Another key idea is decision decoupling. Analytical thinkers separate the decision to act, the path taken after outcomes unfold. This reduces pressure. Another benefit is downside containment. Worst-case scenarios are planned, not feared. Analytical thinkers ask, can I survive this? Can I recover? What safeguards reduce damage? Another principle is avoiding false precision. Scenario thinking accepts ambiguity. Ranges replace exactness. Another important habit is writing scenarios down. Externalizing scenarios clarifies thinking. Analytical thinkers do not rely on memory. Another benefit is reducing regret. Regret decreases when outcomes were anticipated. Analytical thinkers accept responsibility without surprise. Another key idea is adaptation over correctness. Success under uncertainty comes from adjusting quickly, not predicting accurately. Analytical thinkers value adaptability. Another mistake scenario thinking avoids is waiting paralysis. Preparedness replaces delay. Another advantage is alignment with reversibility. Reversible decisions work well with scenario thinking. Paths can change. Another principle is minimum regret framing. Analytical thinkers choose decisions that minimize regret across scenarios. Another benefit is emotional distance. Scenarios depersonalize outcomes. This improves judgment. Another habit is reviewing scenarios periodically. Conditions change. Analytical thinkers update maps. Another advantage is better communication. Scenario thinking improves team decisions. It clarifies reasoning. Another principle is expecting surprise. Scenario thinkers assume something unexpected will happen. They plan slack. Another benefit is decision resilience. When one scenario fails, others remain. Another important insight is scenarios do not eliminate uncertainty. They make it manageable. The core lesson of this chapter is this. Predictions seek correctness. Scenarios build readiness. Under uncertainty, readiness outperforms accuracy. Analytical thinkers do not try to guess the future. They prepare for it. In the next chapter, we will explore building margin of safety into decisions, and why safety margins outperform confidence when outcomes are unknown. The future is unpredictable. Prepared minds are not. Chapter 7. Building margin of safety into decisions. Most people believe confidence creates safety. They assume that if they feel certain enough, prepared enough, or informed enough, their decisions will work out. Analytical thinkers rely on something more reliable. Safety comes from margin, not confidence. Margin of safety means building decisions that can absorb error, surprise, and bad luck without catastrophic failure. Uncertainty guarantees mistakes. Margin of safety makes mistakes survivable. This principle is foundational to decision-making under uncertainty. Analytical thinkers do not assume they will be right. They assume they will be partially wrong, and plan accordingly. The first principle of margin of safety is downside-first thinking. Most people focus on upside. Analytical thinkers start with downside. They ask, what is the worst plausible outcome? Can I survive it? What would recovery look like? If downside is survivable, uncertainty becomes tolerable. Another key principle is buffer creation. Buffers absorb shock. These can be financial buffers, time buffers, emotional buffers, capacity buffers, reputation buffers. Analytical thinkers deliberately leave slack. Slack feels inefficient until it saves you. Another form of margin is redundancy. Single points of failure amplify risk. Analytical thinkers build redundancy where stakes are high. They avoid dependency on one outcome, one person, or one system. Another critical margin is optionality. Options reduce fragility. Analytical thinkers preserve the ability to pivot. They avoid locking into paths that eliminate alternatives too early. Another principle is conservative assumptions. When uncertain, analytical thinkers assume conditions will be slightly worse than expected. They do not assume disaster, but they avoid optimism bias. This conservative bias protects outcomes. Another margin comes from simplicity. Complex systems fail in complex ways. Analytical thinkers prefer simpler solutions when stakes are high. Simplicity reduces failure modes. Another safety margin is reversibility. Decisions that can be undone absorb error. Analytical thinkers design reversibility into choices. This reduces pressure. Another important margin is time flexibility. Rigid timelines increase risk. Analytical thinkers avoid tight deadlines under uncertainty. Time flexibility allows adaptation. Another form of margin is incremental commitment. Instead of full exposure, analytical thinkers commit in stages. Each stage reduces uncertainty. Another principle is avoiding leverage under uncertainty. Leverage magnifies error. Analytical thinkers reduce leverage when outcomes are unclear. This applies to financial leverage, emotional leverage, social leverage, time leverage. Lower leverage increases survivability. Another margin is stress testing. Analytical thinkers imagine stress scenarios. What if demand drops? What if costs increase? What if timelines slip? Stress testing reveals fragility. Another margin is exit clarity. Knowing how to exit reduces fear and risk. Analytical thinkers define exit conditions before committing. Another principle is separating necessity from desire. Margins shrink when decisions are emotionally loaded. Analytical thinkers reduce emotional stakes. Another margin comes from diversification. Concentration increases risk. Analytical thinkers diversify efforts and exposure. Another principle is avoiding irreversible dependency. Dependency limits recovery options. Analytical thinkers maintain independence where possible. Another margin is learning speed. Fast feedback reduces risk exposure. Analytical thinkers choose actions that reveal information quickly. Another safety factor is pre-commitment to restraint. Under pressure, people escalate commitment. Analytical thinkers decide in advance when to stop. Another margin is protecting reputation and trust. Some errors recover, some do not. Analytical thinkers avoid actions that permanently damage credibility. Another principle is not relying on best-case scenarios. Best cases are bonuses, not plans. Analytical thinkers plan around average to bad outcomes. Another margin is resource overestimation correction. People overestimate stamina. Analytical thinkers leave energy reserves. Another safety margin is error tolerance. Systems that tolerate error outperform those that demand perfection. Analytical thinkers design tolerance. Another principle is avoiding complexity stacking. Multiple uncertain variables compound risk. Analytical thinkers limit simultaneous uncertainty. Another margin comes from external perspective. Others see risks you miss. Analytical thinkers seek critique. Another safety factor is avoiding forced timing. Forced timing increases fragility. Analytical thinkers control pace. Another margin is accepting smaller wins. Oversized goals increase risk. Analytical thinkers value sustainable progress. Another principle is decoupling survival from success. Survival comes first. Success builds later. Another margin is emotional recovery capacity. Burnout reduces decision quality. Analytical thinkers protect mental health. Another factor is preparing for recovery, not just prevention. Not all failures can be prevented. Recovery planning matters. Another margin is knowing when not to act. Some decisions reduce safety regardless of preparation. Analytical thinkers avoid unnecessary exposure. Another principle is avoiding heroics. Heroic decisions depend on luck. Analytical thinkers prefer boring resilience. The central lesson of this chapter is this: margin of safety turns uncertainty from a threat into a manageable condition. Analytical thinkers do not rely on being right. They rely on being able to withstand being wrong. This is what allows decisive action without recklessness. In the final chapter, we will explore becoming decisive without being reckless, and how analytical thinkers balance action, caution, and responsibility under uncertainty. Confidence feels good. Margin of safety works. Chapter 8. Becoming decisive without being reckless. Most people confuse decisiveness with confidence. They believe decisive people are certain, bold, and unbothered by doubt. When they hesitate, they assume something is wrong with them. Analytical thinkers understand a more accurate distinction. Decisiveness is not the absence of doubt. It is the ability to act responsibly despite it. Recklessness ignores uncertainty. Paralysis fears it. Decisiveness accounts for it. This balance is the final skill of decision-making under uncertainty. Reckless decisions move fast but collapse under pressure. Paralyzed decisions feel safe but decay with time. Analytical thinkers choose a third path. They move forward deliberately. The first principle of decisive but non-reckless action is clear criteria. Decisions stall when criteria are vague. Analytical thinkers define criteria before choosing. What outcome matters most? What risk is unacceptable? What trade-offs are tolerable? Once criteria are set, decisions simplify. Decisiveness becomes mechanical, not emotional. Another principle is bounded confidence. Analytical thinkers do not pretend certainty. They state confidence as a range. They say, "This is likely, not guaranteed. This is good enough, not perfect. This is the best option given what I know." Bounded confidence allows movement without arrogance. Another key principle is proportional action. Recklessness often comes from overcommitment. Analytical thinkers match action size to uncertainty level. High uncertainty, smaller steps. Lower uncertainty, larger commitments. This proportionality preserves safety. Another critical principle is explicit downside control. Decisive thinkers do not ask, "Will this work?" They ask, "If this fails, can I recover? What damage must be contained? What signals tell me to stop?" Downside clarity unlocks action. Another principle is time awareness. Recklessness ignores timing. Paralysis exaggerates it. Analytical thinkers understand windows. They act when waiting increases risk. Options are eroding. Learning requires movement. They delay only when delay improves quality. Another principle is decision separation. Analytical thinkers separate the decision to act, the commitment level, the continuation criteria. This prevents all-or-nothing thinking. Another habit is emotional neutrality. Decisive thinkers do not decide while emotionally charged. They pause just long enough for emotion to settle, not long enough to stall. This balance protects judgment. Another principle is learning orientation. Recklessness ignores feedback. Paralysis avoids it. Analytical thinkers seek feedback deliberately. They ask, "What will this decision teach me? How fast will I learn? What should I watch closely?" Learning replaces fear. Another key idea is reversibility exploitation. Decisive thinkers act fastest where reversibility exists. They save caution for irreversible choices. This prevents overthinking low-stakes decisions. Another principle is exit awareness. Knowing how to exit reduces fear of entry. Analytical thinkers define exit points before acting. This prevents escalation traps. Another habit is minimum regret framing. Instead of asking what is best, analytical thinkers ask, which option will I regret least across outcomes? This reframing simplifies uncertainty. Another principle is identity detachment. Recklessness often comes from ego. Paralysis comes from fear of being wrong. Analytical thinkers detach self-worth from outcomes. They are free to act and adjust. Another habit is decision documentation. Writing clarifies reasoning and reduces second-guessing. Analytical thinkers trust documented logic more than fluctuating feelings. Another principle is accepting imperfect action. Decisiveness does not require perfect information. It requires sufficient reasoning. Analytical thinkers act once the decision is good enough. Another habit is course correction readiness. Decisive thinkers expect to revise. They do not see adjustment as failure. They see it as intelligence. Another principle is avoiding false heroism. Recklessness often masquerades as courage. Analytical thinkers value resilience over bravery. Another habit is protecting long-term optionality. They avoid decisions that permanently reduce future choices unless necessary. Another principle is decision pacing. They do not stack many high-stakes decisions at once. This preserves clarity. Another habit is clarity recovery. When decisions become cloudy, analytical thinkers pause, reduce noise, and reset structure. Another principle is trusting process over mood. They act according to frameworks, not confidence spikes. Another habit is accepting residual uncertainty. Some doubt remains after every decision. Analytical thinkers act anyway. Another principle is closing loops intentionally. They decide, act, and move forward without rumination. Another habit is evaluating decisions by reasoning, not outcome. Luck is not competence. Competence is structure. Another principle is restoring agency. Decisive thinkers prefer choosing imperfectly over drifting passively. Another habit is learning to stop. Decisiveness includes stopping when conditions change. Another principle is aligning action with values. Values anchor decisions when outcomes are unclear. Another habit is repeating the cycle. Decision-making is iterative. Each decision improves the next. The final lesson of this audiobook, and this entire series, is this. Decisiveness is not about certainty. It is about responsibility under uncertainty. Analytical thinkers do not wait for perfect clarity. They understand risk, limit downside, preserve flexibility, act proportionally, learn continuously. This is how they move forward while others freeze. Not recklessly, not fearfully, but deliberately. Uncertainty does not disappear, but with the right structure, it no longer controls you.